All right, welcome in everyone to another Johnny Torch live broadcast. This is going to be a quicker broadcast today because we are doing a comics creator chat. I like to try to keep these brief, 15, 20 minutes. But before we get into that, of course, we want to remind you to check out The Adventures of Bullets Bourbon Private Eye. This is the issue that I'm working on right now. So this one is not going to be available until hopefully March. We're getting a lot of strides made on this, though. It's getting done after a lot of problems and issues that creeped up with my computer. And unfortunately, it's going to take me about a month longer than I anticipated. But you want to keep your eye out for this one. Check the link in the description below. You can find all our previous issues. We've got 11 issues strong, and we're looking forward to our 12th big issue coming out this year. This is going to be our 12th big year in comics. And it kind of betrays that we got 12 issues, and people probably think that means I put out an issue a year. Last year, that was the case. That's why this one is a little late. This one I was hoping was going to be out by at least January, making it maybe just a month behind. But of course, unforeseen events caused that to be a little longer. But actually, we did a couple of remasters you want to check out. The first 3 storylines in the saga, we remastered them into trades, and I'm quite pleased with the results. I always actually envisioned the Bullets Bourbon saga to be made up of long, graphic novel length stories. I never really wanted them to come out as serialized pamphlets, but that's the only way really to do it, or a book would take a year and a half to come out. And, well, maybe a year, because technology being what it is, it helps, but still, I'm a one-man operation, so these things are going to take time. And yeah, quite honestly, I would like to do the other 2 stories once this one is done, and the previous one, Family Jewels. I like to put them in trade format as well. But it does feel more comic book-ish to serialize them and have the issues come out a little at a time. That's sort of the bread and butter of the comics industry. I really wish I could do it more often than twice a year, but it's kind of a challenge. But it's coming the way I want it to come out, and it's been a real treat to see the series take shape. This, of course, we're calling our season finale, because we have like 5 issues per story. 5 issues per season, 5 stories per season, breaking that down to about 12 issues, maybe 13 issues. So you can kind of think of it as a television series, the current day television series where they have like 13 episode seasons, not like the old days when there used to be like 20 to 30 episodes. But if you look at it that way, we're coming to the end of a season. It took us about 12 years to get there. But a lot of on-the-job training when you're a comic book creator. A lot of this stuff doesn't just come at you fully formed. You have to make choices, you have to learn tricks, and you have to go back and fix up problems that occurred before. And that's what our topic is today. So check this out in the link in the description below. And you could see everything we've got there for Bullets Bourbon Comics. We're going to talk about being a perfectionist. Now, I saw A Drink with Crazy doing a interview with Tyler from Talk and Draw, I believe is the name of his channel. And one of the things he said really struck me, because it's exactly what I believe. But there's a lot of people that nowadays are really nitpicking and trying to take the claim of criticism to another level where it's just nitpicking. And it seems to me the quote-unquote pro creator uses this as an excuse to look down on the up-and-coming creator. And I see this a lot of times. I'm not singling out any one individual. I've seen this a couple of times where, again, comics to me have always been disposable. Now, when I say that, people take this as, well, you're not taking it seriously, or you think subpar craftsmanship. No, nothing like that. What Royce said is exactly what my train of thought is when you're reading a comic book, Depending on the length of the comic book, it probably take you 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 tops. And what you're doing is you're giving 3 seconds attention to the panel, to the action, to the art, and then you're taking another 5 seconds to read the dialogue, and then you're moving on through it. Now, if the art is very rapturous and glorious, and maybe you'll spend an extra 3 seconds on it. If the dialogue is, something that really captures your attention, you'll spend another 2 seconds on it. Honestly, you're ripping through that comic at a very good clip, at a very fast rate. Nobody is going to sit there and look at a comic and be like, well, I don't think the artist had the right light source when he was composing this image. Or, well, I think maybe the doorway would realistically be moved somewhere down. I mean, there's come a way now where people are just nitpicking and really dramatizing the shortcomings of other people's comics. And I think that's really pathetic because honestly, nobody is perfect. And I think this image pretty much sums up what people are doing. They're trying to get everything lined up in a perfectionist way where, well, it's not up to my standards, and my standards are nobody gets a 10. Nobody gets a 10 in my book. Everybody's got something to learn, everybody's got room to grow. Yeah, but if you look at things that way, you're never going to end up putting up a book. You're never going to end up putting out a book. What you're going to wind up with is a lot of wasted time, a lot of frustration, and a lot of second guessing yourself. You can't do that. You have to put out the product that you can put out, given your talent level, given your experience. Because again, I went back and remastered some of my old books because why? I knew that I had learned some things that would make the older books better. That's the only time you look back. If you want to remaster and you say, all right, I know how to do digital lettering now. I didn't then. That needs to be fixed. I know that there's some coloring issues. I'll fix that. But you can't wait until you are completely on your game because you'll never get there. Quite honestly, you'll never get there. And if you think you've gotten there, there's 5 or 6 guys that are up the ladder that are going to say, no, you haven't got there. It's a fruitless quest. It's a lonely task to try to embrace perfectionism. All you can do is do the best you can do. Now, I know that there are, and I'm sure this is the case with all artists and all comic creators, there are a couple of panels, even in the last book I did, I would love to have back. And I know that given my talent and my expertise, I'm not really going to be able to get that panel drawn any better than I did it the last time. Now, maybe the next time where I'm faced with another panel that's in a similar context, that maybe I'll take some more information going in to fix it up and do it a little bit better. But you can't go into these books thinking I'm gonna get 100% on this. The story is not going to have any little issues for anybody to pick out. People are going to nitpick you anyway. And the best you can do is to try to figure out on your own. And of course, it also helps to have a second pair of eyes if you can have an editor or somebody that's going to look out for you with story problems. Someone that's going to say, well, why did he go through that door when that door seems much easier to get through? Something like that. But as long as you don't have some wildly difficult problem to explain away, you pretty much can get through a story without the reader second guessing everything. I mean, this is kind of like, I said I wasn't going to drop names, but like, for instance, I know for a fact, like, your boy Zach used to do this when he used to review books, and he was right 99% of the time. But if you go into a book reading it like, Galactus, I have the ultimate nullifier, you don't stand a chance, and you're going to get sent back to the dimension of the elves with the crooked ears and the long nose, you're going to make any book sound boring. That's not critiquing something. You can read a Stan Lee, Jack Kirby epic and still pick it apart for story and for, context and for maybe even art. I mean, Jack Kirby was called king for a reason, but nobody's beyond a reproach. Everybody's going to be finding a little issue that they could take issue with if they apply themselves. And it's the same thing. If you open a book looking for a problem, you're going to find it. It's not going to be very difficult. You'll find it on page one, you'll find it on the cover. And part of the problem is we shouldn't be going into books that way. We shouldn't be looking at a book going, especially with a first time artist slash writer, creator, whatever they are. They're not going to be giving you their best yet, most likely. Um, it's going to be difficult for them to learn from the first book. It's going to take two or three books before you actually kind of find yourself. And that's kind of what I felt doing the books myself. By the third, fourth book, I kind of realized where things were. And I think it's kind of the same way with everyone. You can't go into a book looking to rip it apart and criticize it and call yourself, well, I'm being a completely justified critic. I'm going to look at this and be completely impartial and be completely honest, because you're not doing that. What happens is, like any book I've read, I mean, you look at any book, and when you come up with a question in your mind that is, well, does this entirely make sense, or do I understand from this image what is going on? That is the only litmus test. I mean, that is the only way to really figure out if a story is working or not. If you can just at face value see it and say, okay, this makes the most sense. You can't go in there trying to rewrite it and trying to say, well, gee, wouldn't the story be better if, X grew wings and flew and he has powers now that he can fly? That's kind of the basic problem that people have going into these books, is they're trying to, you know, put their own spin on it. They want to put their own view on what they would do had they the story. That might not be what the writer wanted. The same thing with this truck should have looked much better. This castle should look much better. Possibly that's the way the artist wanted it. More likely the way the writer wanted it. If the writer dictated to the artist what to come up with, it's it's very it's very nitpicky. It's very being obnoxious. I'm trying to find another term for it that won't be quite as inflammatory, but it's quite obnoxious to go into books and trying to pick them apart. You're going to be labeled a perfectionist. Nothing is ever going to be good enough for you. Now, again, another example I think of is like Tolkien, when he was confronted with a not even a critic, really, just a person saying, well, why didn't the eagles fly Sam and Frodo to Mordor? And he basically said, because there'd be no story, shut up. And you have to have that kind of chutzpah if you're a comic creator. You have to say, look, the story outweighs the needs of traditional storytelling. You know what I mean? You don't need to dot the I's and cross the T's on everything. You have to let the story tell itself. You have to have faith in the reader that they're going to enjoy the journey enough to not nitpick every single thing. Like I said, if it makes no sense, that's an issue. But if it's something that you can reason away and say, well, there really would be no story without this. Uh, you know, I'm my own worst critic on these things, I like to think. And sometimes more information doesn't make a story better. Like, you could sit there and try to make an excuse for, well, why, in the case of Lord of the Rings, why did that happen? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? A lot of times the answer is simply because there'll be no story if it doesn't. And you kind of give at least as much of an explanation as you can, but let the reader imply what their own perception of the event is. And like I said, sometimes more information doesn't make a story better. It drags it down. For instance, the story I'm working on, like I was talking about, the story that we're on now, Pencil Neck's Revenge, the nursery crimes. I was kind of disappointed because Pencil Neck doesn't really get to kill anyone, possibly Bullets Bourbon, but I mean before the big finish. And so I thought, well, maybe I can put a scene in where he sort of kills a plainclothesman who's following him to make sure he's not up to something. And that's all well and good, but you're really just padding the story and dragging it down with an unnecessary scene. So people could question, they could say, well, why, if Pencil Neck, they think that he's a killer and everything, why isn't he being shadowed? Because he's been released from prison, and maybe they'd be shadowing him and see what happens. But again, you're dragging the whole story down. You don't need to have all the I's dotted. You don't need to have all the T's crossed. That would just drag it down and make for a longer story with another scene that really doesn't add anything to the story, even though it explains something. Even though it explains, yeah, you've seen Pencil Neck use his powers in the story now, so you can see him actually killing somebody by erasing them. Or you can explain away why nobody is keeping an eye on Pencil Neck, or Thelma for that matter, because she could probably be a suspect because she's his well, for lack of a better term, henchwoman. But again, you don't really, or you shouldn't really, feel the need to explain everything, because everybody's going to have a question. Not all questions are worthy of answers, because some of them are not in good faith. Some of them are just, well, why didn't that happen? I would have had that happen. Well, you're not writing the story. You know what I mean? You can't explain away every single thing, or you'll have the Encyclopedia Britannica as the size of a book. Now, some people might enjoy that. It's possible. That might be what you want. But basically, brevity is the soul of wit, as the bard once said. You want to get the points out quickly. You want to make sure people understand, but you want to make sure that you're still burning through the story at a pretty steady clip, that you're not going to get bogged down in explanations. That's why every story basically has a pointer scene, as George Lucas would say. That's where the exposition goes, where you try to explain, usually in one fell swoop, what the story is, what the plot is, what everybody's going to try to do, and how they're going to try to do it. That's where you try to answer most of your questions, right there. Because if you're going to try to keep up with every question that could be asked and try to answer every question, you're going to be spending a lot of time and spinning your wheels. You have to have faith in the story that you've come up with. Like I said, you probably should get some more eyes on it, make sure that there's no glaring errors. But basically, if you come up with a story, you don't really need to answer all the questions. And again, as I've always said, art is subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You don't have to be too tough on yourself with the art. People can understand what's going on. Like I said today on Twitter, you don't need 357 lines on a tree trunk on the bark to get the reader to understand that's a tree. And a lot of people get bogged down in, oh, I have to make this look like the Taj Mahal. I have to make sure that this is something that's going to be worthy of being hung in a museum. And, it's got to be the Sistine Chapel meets Macbeth. You know what I mean? Get over yourself. You know what I mean? You don't need to take that much time on art, as long as you can tell what the object is, as long as the people look like people, as long as the setting is pretty obvious and you know where you're supposed to be. If you're in a garden, you can tell there's trees, there's flowers, there's hedges. If you're in a library, you see shelves with books. If you're in a bar, you see a bar with stools and a couple of bottles on the shelf. You know what I mean? You really don't need to overthink this. But people don't want to tell you this, especially the pros, because they make it look like, well, you can't do it. You can't do it yet. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. Who are they to tell you that you can't do it? Who are they to be an authority over you? Now, like I said, if you've got the fundamentals and you've got the basics, go out there and try to do it. Go out there and, prove yourself. Sometimes it's good to have a little chip on your shoulder. Sometimes it's good for people to say, look, you can't do it. And then that will give you the impetus to say, look, I'm going to go out and do it, regardless what anybody says. And the more you try and the more you keep at it, the more you're going to improve. I tell that to all the kids when the kids come see me at conventions and stuff. I always like to encourage them. And they always say, I'm starting to draw and this and that. And I always say, well, keep at it. If you can draw at least an hour or two a day and you keep that up, you're going to get better. You're certainly not going to get worse. The longer you do something, the more adept you get at doing it and the better you're going to get. So again, that's my advice. And you could take it for what it's worth, but I'm just sick and tired of people being perfectionists. And, oh, this book isn't good enough. And, you know how many times people were turned down with their books and from publishers and this and that. That's why I don't have any use for publishers. I'm just going to do it myself. I'm going to self-publish. I'm going to let the readers decide. I'm going to let the audience, the comic book buying public decide whether they want to buy. I'm not going to let a publisher decide if I'm good enough for their company or their publications. I'm going to just do it myself because you have to have the supreme confidence in yourself that what you're doing is worthwhile. You can't let anybody talk you out of it and act like, well, maybe if you did this, maybe if you did that, and you changed the names and you maybe centered it around then it's no longer your book. It's no longer your baby. It's no longer your story. You're hiring it out to other people to do whatever they want with it. And we all know that that never really works. That's not, you're never going to thrive creatively that way. All right, so that's about it for today. And let me know in the comments below if you have any comments about this. What is your opinion on this? Are some creators, especially the bigger ones, the more high profile ones, are they being too perfectionist? I mean, are they really thinking that people are going to pour over every page and see every single little line and go over every line of dialogue as if it was William Shakespeare's? Or do they just flip through it in 10 minutes? They either get a laugh, they get a cry, they see some action, and then they're done with it and they put it on the shelf for like 2 years. I'm thinking the latter, and I'm pretty sure that 99% of comic book readers are normies that will be like that. And the other 1 or 2% are probably the ones that are in the industry and they want to brag about how they know about light sources and how they know about Oxford commas and this and that. All right, so until next we meet, this is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.